It's April 7th, 2021, and we're talking about the LCS finals, the most marketable players in the LCS, and Legends of RuneTerra with Riot caster David Phreak Turley. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and my guest today is LCS pundit David Phreak Turley. Phreak, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I am looking forward to talking about a lot of the topics. And I think the topics we're going to talk about are mostly going to be what everybody's talking about. We're getting to the end of a split, right? Everybody wants to talk about the end of season awards. Everybody wants to talk about the upcoming finals that are this weekend. But, getting to hear it from you and somebody who is so close to the production of the show and, spending all this time talking about it and preparing storylines with the other caster, I think it's going to be really fascinating getting your take on some of this stuff. So why don't we just quickly start with recapping kind of last weekend. What did you find most interesting about the way the LCS played out last weekend with the two series we had?
I think the most interesting thing for me was watching Cloud9 execute top jungle better. Coming into that series, okay, it's playoff perks now, so he's finally playing better than Jensen. Tactical's been sort of inting, but maybe you can turn it around. But I remember we had the story meeting leading into that series, and I was basically getting asked okay, well, in case you do a caster check-in, what do you guys want to talk about? And I'm like, you could pick literally any of the one-on-one matchups, any of those five, and something really exciting is there. So if you want one, pick whatever you want coverage on, and I am more than happy to opine on what that matchup is. And what I was most pleased about then coming out of that series was how much Cloud9 just completely top gapped that series. Sure, through blabber, whatever, but okay, here's game one where they're all right, we are first pick connected, and you're wow, here's Fudge, who 80% of people were he's the 9th best top laner on the LCS. And it's here's Alfari, he's unanimous, he's the best. And I was and perfect wave management into
and you're
first
go
blood at level
him, right?
5-6. Right.
Yeah.
And it's cool, we blinded Renekton, you have a million counter picks, the entire champ pool's up there, and first blood level 6 because of wave management, because Fudge is actually a good player and knows how to wave manage and how to bring his jungler up. And then, it's 2 levels later, and Perksy, look, and it's a 3-0 start to top lane. And no one else is doing anything from Team Liquid. So we did it, right? Castile's sitting there waiting to scale as their top lane is getting, 1v2 to 1v3. And it's yep, good job, Fudge. You played the lane appropriately. You got counterpick and then killed the guy in a turret. And then when Fudge was on tank duty playing weak side, look, he's good at playing tank duty weak side. And they're winning elsewhere. It's this is why I had him top 3 in all pro. It's why I had him up on the top lane tier list. He played to the level I expected him to play well to. Look, if they're in a locked 1v1, I still expect Alfari to win that lane. But there's more to the game than that. And it was cool to see the biggest contention I have had, which is Fudge is good and someday is bad-ish. And both those things have now happened so far in the playoff run, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, it is really interesting to talk about those kinds of things because you have the conversation of when you're making, say, a power ranking positionally or or voting all pro, right? You're having to are you having this conversation from how are they performing right now, or would you want them on your team? Which ones would you want on your team? Right. And I think from different perspectives on that, I think it was more justifiable to have Fudge dropped down a little lower based on the performance up to a certain point, midway through the split, right? But I still would have had him way higher than that. I want him on my team because I knew this was coming, right? You could see the signs, and I've been the captain of the Fudge hype train for a year and a half now. Ever since in Academy, I was hyping him up a lot, and you could see this coming. You could see that he was nervous, right? The first part of the split, for sure. I would say, and he was having a lot of simple mistakes, but it was here. He's a domestic player, and that makes a difference as well. All these kinds of things. And I think on Someday's side as well, you can also, I think, a little bit of the flip of that. You can say he's performing, bottom half of the LCS and top lane. How much of that is on him? How much of it is on the synchronization with closer? Would I still sign him for my team? I'd be maybe a little bit more positive on signing him for my team relative to his current performance. But even so, he's definitely not performing as well as he could be or as well as he was earlier in the season.
Sure, yeah. And I would say, at least for me, I really strongly believe a tier list is a measurement of how they're playing right now.
Yeah.
And to be clear, like the tier list was specifically excluding lock-in. So the
Yeah.
most tragic games from Fudge were completely off the record in that regard. But otherwise, it's like, all right, well, here's our top lane tier list. And it's like, oh well, here's Bjergsen. He's got 7 trophies, so of course he's number one. And it's like, how is this interesting content otherwise, right? Like, why is this the discussion? Like, we're not just doing trophy count.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I spent a lot of time, and I remember doing the top lane tier list back then, and then I'll move on. Was like, I initially did, here's my gut check tier list, and I wrote my 1 through 10 doing gut check, and it had Fudge at 7 or 8. Maybe 9, I forget exactly. And then I spent a lot of time with your website being one of them, looking at like, okay, what are these players actually doing? Are they gaining counter pick? Are they blind picking? How much jungle proximity are they getting? Are they getting camped by their opponents similarly? Like, basically, how many resources are they getting? How well are they doing in early game as a result of those resources or as a consequence of those resources? And then, okay, then is that translating into you winning or losing? Like, I still have to reconcile like everyone's tier list placement with your actual record at the end of the day. Like, CLG can't have a bunch of 6th place players and be in 10th. Like, it's not possible. If they played a 6th level, they'd be at 6th, not 10th when the tier list came out. So like, I cannot like, that has to be reconciled with your actual record. And sure, yes, Fudge is in 1st place because he's on cloud 9. I get that. So he's not automatic number 1, but like, I'm looking at top lane jungle proximity. I'm looking at CS difference and whatnot, and I'm like, ooh yeah, here's Sunday who's got FBI and Huhi on his team, and he's getting negative jungle pressure, and he's like 1-11 in the laning phase, and I'm like, you're 1-11 in laning phase. This is not the reason your team is winning, right? And it's like doing that kind of stuff and looking at Fudge, and it's like, ooh, you have the highest KDA at 15 of any player in top lane. You have more KDA at 15 than Alfari, and Alfari gets camped for. Clearly you're doing something right, Fudge, that like I should not put you at 8th for. And then eventually reconciled that and decided that he was 2nd. So yeah, it is a measure of like what they had been doing so far that split, and that's how I put them. And then thankfully like vindicated by the fact that Fudge kept playing very, very well. He top gapped someday in the 100 Thieves series, and he clearly matched Alfari well in the TL one. It's like, cool, all right, like he clearly is the player I thought he could be.
Yeah, there's always a lot of interest in seeing how they develop, especially into the playoffs where it matters so much more, and you can prepare for one specific opponent. And I think that's one thing that's been pretty cool to see as well. We had another series last weekend. TSM 100 Thieves. What was your overall take on that series? Because my impression, I didn't get to watch it live. I was busy with family Easter things, and I watched it the next day. But my impression on social media following along is people really hated that series and thought it was just horrible. Did you feel that way about it?
The series felt pretty lackluster. Now, I will quickly take a step back, because, and this is me being maybe a bit fragile ego. There are tragic games in every league in the world. I'm coming proactively of like, this is not just NA LoL XD. Like, to be fair, these are our 3rd and 4th best teams, right? Like, teams better than this are the ones going to MSI. We don't grade the LPL based on Rare Atom. Right, we grade the LPL based on Fun plus Phoenix and IG winning worlds. Right, we grade the LCK off of Damwon and T1 and Samsung. Right, it's like this. That's the actual look for these teams. And so, hey, when we go and send Cloud9 to MSI, that's the team we grade. The region off to a certain degree. Yeah, these are our 3rd and 4th best teams. And 100 Thieves are having a bit of a collapse. I think they went 6-3 first round robin, then went 5-4 second or something around that point. Right, like they have a worse record post Demonte, which I'm not saying is Demonte versus Ryoma, but the team is playing worse. Since the first
as a whole, their trajectory has continued downwards. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And it's like, okay, well, if seeding was different, maybe they wouldn't have beaten EG, because I think EG lost to TSM, right? And it's like, maybe they're actually the 5th best team, and they'd only have beaten Dignitas, which they did, right? But like, okay, well, now we're watching a battle of the 5th, and so whatever, right? Like
sure,
they're a top half team, but not that strong. TSM, like stuff went wrong, right? That series was 100 Thieves was the better team for the first half of the game, and then just like consistently threw the game away. It's like they probably win that series 3-1. I ultimately said that like my prediction for that series was TSM 3-2 because I expected 100 Thieves to throw a bit less than they did. Like that probably should have been the record, was 3-2 either way. Look, I don't have high hopes for TSM either. Unfortunately, they're just not really quite coming together, and that's too bad. But ultimately, whatever. Like we'll see who the third best team is by Worlds time. Otherwise, I only care about the first best team.
Yeah. See, like my take on the series, watching it afterwards, was I expected a TSM 3-0. I thought 100 Thieves wouldn't be able to bring it together well enough. So I was actually impressed with the amount of early game 100 Thieves were able to put together, and like Ryoma stepping out of his lane quite a bit. Closer had a much better series than we'd been seeing out of him, and a lot of other stuff. And I was a little disappointed with TSM that they couldn't maintain some of the early game improvements they'd put together. So like I was more positively impressed by some things, and then had poorer opinions of other things. But overall, I felt like, okay, it wasn't not a very good series played overall, but it's not something to go out there and like meme NA on Twitter about to me. So
yeah,
I don't know, but maybe that's just because I'm generally trying to be a positive person. that could be.
I try to as well. Right, and like I want to be positive as well. It's I don't want to come out and be like XD, the LEC sucks too. Like that's no. I mean, obviously, like there's a lot of very good teams, very very good players out there. Congratulations, Wonder, on making it into Masters. Props, buddy. But yeah, like these are good players. These are good teams overall. But like as you progress, like the competition gets steeper, and you can make fewer and fewer mistakes. It's like and those are mistakes that you can't make.
Yeah, but I'd much rather see C9 and TL play again, which I think we're going to. So that'll be good. So I mean, why don't we just roll on with that? Like, I think we've already laid out some of the expectations. I think for the finals weekend, TL TSM are going to play in the third place match on Saturday. Winner will play against Cloud9 on Sunday. That's going to be an in-person event for the teams, at least. Finally, how exciting is that to you?
Really exciting. I'm happy it's going to be happening. I've been to like my COVID compliance like meetings and whatnot, which matters less for me because I'm not on that site, casting and whatnot. But I'll be doing the same sort of setup with Worlds where I took my COVID test this morning. Probably coming back negative. It has for the last few. For anything else I've done on site. And then keep my very large distance with other people and cast to some degree of in person, which will be nice. And it's like, staff is not allowed in the player rooms while there are players there. If you need to go in for any reason, go in the hallway, have them leave, go and do whatever you need to do. So it's like it'll be nice that there's that level of LAN kind of happening again. I'm excited for the moderate term future where like a lot of people are vaccinated and we can go back to more normalcy and whatnot. Like it's a year of staying at home is more than I would have liked.
I'm just looking forward to like a certain level of production around the event that is not just a remote analyst desk and then remote gameplay. Like the fact that they're actually going to bring players out on stage and celebrate them and have some kind of like this whole Pentakill thing that was announced. Like they actually get to produce an event.
I know I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. In terms of the gameplay that's going to happen, I think are you expecting like TL 3-0 over TSM to that extent?
Probably. I guess I haven't thought about what my prediction is yet, but I think
let's do it.
I'd probably go 3-0 or 3-1 for TL. I think they are heavy favorites. I don't think TL are super mistake prone. I think they are imperfect, sure.
Yeah.
I think, obviously Tactical's having an off split, and that's too bad. That's kind of rough. So that hampers their chances a lot because I think he was better last year. But like, Santorin is playing, I think, a bit below average as well, but he's still a good player. Like Jensen's good, Core JJ. I mean, ultimately, I just feel like every player on TL is playing worse than normal. And so if they were playing at peak level, I'd be like, oh yeah, easy 3-0. Like peak TL is actually an absurdly good team, and they're not right now. So they're definitely better than TSM for sure. I don't know if TSM bounced back from last week and play a lot better. Like TSM can win that series if we see peak TSM and mediocre TL. TSM's the better team. But if it's mediocre TSM, mediocre TL, it's TL like 3-1.
Yeah, I think to me a lot of the thing with TL is they play very straightforward most of the time in most of their lanes, right? Like Jensen's going to try to win his 1v1 matchup. Alfari's going to try to win his 1v1 matchup. The jungler and the support are going to try to gank top lane, or they actually ganked a lot of mid lane this split, and especially last weekend. But other than Core JJ, one thing that I've lacked a little bit from the team is like doing the creative, like, hey, I'm going to drop this and go make the play over there, and move around the map really aggressively, that kind of thing. And I think those are the types of plays that can pick TSM apart, because TSM aren't necessarily great at that too, specifically coming out of mid lane. So like Perks as someone who can pick apart Power of Evil in the laning phase by leaving mid lane, Perks is much better at that than Jensen is. But Jensen is still going to win lane, I think, or he should, with the right matchup, win lane just 1v1 straight up over Power of Evil. And I don't know if TSM can kind of resist that early pressure and just the straight up laning differences.
I think Spica can. Like, I think Spica is Spica and Sword Art both. Like, I was really, really unimpressed with Sword Art during lock-in. Like, he played objectively badly during lock-in. I remember making a video about it on the Countdown stream. Like, the man would ignite while stunning someone who has cleanse up. It's like, these are like mechanical, like basic stuff that a Diamond 4 support can get right, that I would get right. And it's like, Sword Art, how did you do this wrong? Like, what happened to you? But since then, like, TSM is, at least for a while, right? When TSM was doing really, really well in the regular season, Sword Art was very much unlocked to go roam around. Lost was very safe in bot lane on like his Xayah or Kai'Sa or whatever, not getting killed. And like Sword Art would just get really good stuff. Like, his roams were finally working. And I think during the regular season, Sword Art was a better player than Core JJ, and just like, I had Sword Art heads and shoulders above Core JJ in all pro voting. He might have been on my MVP ballot as well. Like, through the regular season, I was really, really impressed with Sword Art, and he was the player I expected him to be. Whereas I felt like Core JJ had kind of lost, as you're kind of talking about, like that edge, the sort of dynamism. So if that plays here, like, I think TSM could get a huge support difference. I think TSM could get a huge bot lane difference. Huni playing well can, like, if we have a Huni playing like Fudge was playing, and I think Huni and Fudge were like pretty similarly skilled, like, that can happen again. Now, you don't have Blabber, and that sucks, right? And you're going to get mid diff.
Spica on an on day can do a lot of those things too, right? Like,
yeah, exactly, right?
He's not as consistent as Blabber, but
exactly. So, like, I would straight up take TSM's bot lane right now in terms of as better players, and jungle, top, and mid can be close enough that, like, that can make the difference.
Yeah. Like, let's be clear. When I say Jensen, should be able to outlane Power of Evil, I think they both play a very similar style, and I think, with the right champion picks and Power of Evil having a good day, he can win lanes against Jensen. And typically, he's overcome him in the past with stronger team fighting in mid and late game. He can still do that. Like, I don't see Jensen as this, like, as a better player than PoE. Actually, I would have had PoE higher on my, like, mid lane tier list power rankings, all pro, whatever, than Jensen this split, but. It just depends on how they interact in different phases of the game.
For sure.
So, I think TL should be favored, but there are ways TSM can win. If, assuming that there is a chance for either one to get out, which of them do you think has a better chance to beat C9 in the finals?
Better chance to beat C9? I don't know. I will say TL only because Cloud9 are playing at a very high level. I'm pretty happy with all their players. I think they're playing 80% or higher, which is where better than I'd put most teams in the LCS, like of their own skill levels.
Sure.
And so the only way to beat Cloud9 is that one of the teams has to play at about 100%. Like, I think Cloud9 right now, current form, is the better team, and I think ultimately TL's ceiling is higher. If everyone's playing at 100%, I think TL are stronger than TSM. Like, Peak Santorin is better than Peak Blabber, for example, and Peak Jensen is better than Peak Power of Evil, for example, and Peak Core J is a literal world champion. So, like, that all just lines up better. Peak Alphari actually 1v2's top lane, right? So, those are the kind of performances that you kind of need, I think, to beat Cloud9, and those are the ones that we can get out of TL that I don't think we're going to get out of TSM. Like, Huni is not going to do that. Peak Huni is not. It's not 2015 anymore, right? So, like, ultimately, if you're going to overperform, only one team can overperform to the level that's going to beat Cloud9, and that's Team Liquid.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think depending on the way the play styles come through, I actually lean TSM. I did one of the run-up videos we did a few weeks ago. I ranked the teams who has the best chance to beat C9 because they were first in the league at that point. And I put TSM there, and I think I still do. And it has more to do with, like, individual strengths. Rather, I should say, more to do with, like, the things the team is good at and how they match up against the things that C9 are bad at. Like, I think C9 struggle a little bit with some of their late game stuff where they play the map very widely. They like to play all three lanes at once. That can be sometimes a little vulnerable against a comp that likes to stack on major objectives and just doesn't let you have time to get your split push set up. And I think TSM are a little better than that at TL. And I think TL's lane phase is a little more straightforward, and Cloud9 are the much more creative team, and they can pick apart straightforward, predictable laning phases. But it's it's pretty hard to say, because I think TSM would need to do their strengths perfectly, and C9 would still have to have an off day. Whereas to me, TL, if they play all of their strengths perfectly, I think C9 can still beat it. I don't know. It's hard
I
to say
can
between
see
them.
that logic. The nit I would pick there is the idea of like playing straightforward lanes. I think I don't know. I'm not a fan of that line of reasoning because like, okay, a straightforward lane that you're playing well is just like, well, I'm CSing appropriately and I'm playing my matchup correctly, and like we're warding the correct sides and tracking the jungler so I can't be ganked. Now, Blabber certainly can be incredibly creative, right? But like, I don't know if like, well, Pee-wee's going to sit back and not punish CS because Blabber might be in this weird rush that like it should be impossible to be in, but he skipped 3 camps, right? Like, is that actually like an odds positive play? No, is my guess. But like, I mean, in general, right? It's like playing the early game effectively and like the way you should is just like, well, we ganked strong side and our jungler pathed well. And I mean, Santorin last year was like the first blood king of like the world. Like he was like top 2 or top 3 in first blood percent of any player in any league. It's like, that means he ganks really, really well for players like Solo and Wild Turtle, right? Like now he's got Core JJ and Alfar. Like, how does he not get kills here, right? So I still feel like TL have the ability to be explosive and dynamic early game and have the staff to do so. So I guess, you know, I will agree with you in like a mid to late game sort of situation where teams can be like very standard and predictable in that regard. But I feel like early games, like, I don't know, like playing them standard is just like doing the right things in general, and there's variations of the theme from there because there's only so many plays regardless.
Yeah, I think there are. It's the things where you make the suboptimal, you know, what might on paper be the suboptimal play, but since it's unexpected, it achieves something. Which those are the ones that I tend to look at that are a little bit hard to pin down, right? Because if it works, was it suboptimal? And if it was, I don't know, like how do you apply some of those labels? It's kind of weird, right? But like Jensen as a player, for example, like in both P and Power of Evil, I think both struggle with this a little bit, that they will maximize CS at the expense of a play where they maybe could have teleported into top lane play and dropped a wave. Like it's those kinds of things that perks in like Jizuke. Jizuke tries it more often and fails it more often, right?
Oh yeah, sure. He's got a higher a lower bar for that, and that's fair. And to be fair, like you know, those kinds of plays are how you should play early game, right? Like dropping a wave to get a kill is a good play, period, right? Like that is just actually correct. And I know you talked about this with like with talking about Power of Evil and perks, where it's like making a mistake because you did something you shouldn't and making a mistake because you didn't do something you should. They're both mistakes, and they're like you should do the correct thing in both cases. I guess if you know, by like, you know, having, I don't know what, like normal early games, I forget the actual word you used, means risk averse standard. Right? Yeah. If that means risk averse early games, like, oh yeah, totally. Right. Like a risk averse early game is by nature incorrect because you're risk averse, right? You're not properly tolerating risk for what are good plays. 100% on board with that. Like, I actually think Jensen and Pee-wee are in fact risk averse players.
Bit of a terminology gap, I think.
Sure, so. but yeah, now I agree with you, right? Like getting on the same page. I actually fundamentally agree with the idea that you know, risk aversion is in fact a bad thing, and you should be risk tolerant when you play the game. And if you're MLXG, you're risk loving, and any fight is good fight. And you know, everyone is their own spot on that spectrum. So, but yeah, ultimately, then to that point, I agree, and that can be weakness, sure, if you're not risk tolerant enough.
You know, I just want to put it out there that for a couple of people who were having an artificial Twitter beef that I manufactured purely for content, we're doing a really bad job of maintaining it. So,
oh yeah, well, you know, I mean, I managed
to you could be a lot more mean.
Argument. I mean, I did entirely misrepresent your argument. Where it's like, well, no, playing the good early game is playing a good early game. What is this garbage analysis? And then I fix your wording for you. Much better.
Yeah. Okay, I will respond appropriately on Twitter tomorrow.
Great.
So Cloud9, I think, are going to be favored. It's strange because coming into the playoffs, I thought TL had done enough, and C9 were falling off a little bit at the end of the season that I thought, hey, maybe TL have exceeded C9 now. And it's completely switched back the other way now, you know, where I did have expectations back in December, like C9 are going to run the whole season. And now we're kind of back to that where I do have them favored. I think there is still plenty of opportunity for TL to take them down, or TSM to pull out some kind of a miracle for Bjergsen to manufacture something, but I think Cloud9 have to be favorites. And if you look at it from the grand scope of the split, that won't end up being a big surprise, right? But I think there have been some surprises in the LCS this split. What are some of the best kind of, especially on the positive side, the best surprises that you've seen in the LCS in spring so far?
Sure. The easy choice is obviously Dignitas. It's sad that their playoff run was cut short by getting, what was it, fully 3-0'd by 100 Thieves?
Yeah.
And this was after 100 Thieves got like clapped the week before. So like, oh, my prediction for that series, by the way, was Dignitas 3-2 because I thought 100 Thieves wouldn't put it together. I thought, the mid hole was still there. And then, Someday won his lane. Fake God just didn't have a very good day. Game 3 was clearly Dignitas tilted, and that sucked. Okay, unlucky. But still, right? Dignitas came away with a pretty solid record. Most people power rank them 8th, 9th, something around there. And it was pretty tragic. CLG towards the end when the roster finally came together. Even though RJS looked pretty good, and you can't just be like, oh, well, Wiggly's the entire reason you guys lost all your games. It's like once they finally got the roster together, they looked okay. They won a few games. I think they were like around 50-50 with the roster together. Yeah. So, okay. I'm waiting to see CLG kind of pick up and go. Otherwise, what else are we seeing? Oh, I mean, Fudge as well, right? I'm not sure what my expectations were of Fudge. Like, he was clearly smurfing Academy, but that doesn't always mean everything. There's plenty of players I've seen Smurf Academy that just can't make the transition to pro and do it in the LCS stage. But yeah, Fudge post lock-in was very good as well, and kind of maintained that for pretty much the entire split, especially for playoffs. So those are probably my big 3 hits.
Yeah, and it's when you use the word surprises, right? Then it comes back to, like, you kind of reference expectations. Like, did you expect this player to be one of the better players in their position by spring playoffs, right? And I think coming in, I would have said Fudge would be, I have to remember the actual wording I used. I did call out coming into the season, like, I think his laning is going to take some time to catch up, which it has. But it got there, by kind of end of spring into the playoffs. I don't know if I would have called him a top 3 LCS top laner by this point. I think he's overperformed my expectations there, but I definitely expected him to be very serviceable and be like, mid-range player. He hasn't necessarily been a surprise for me, but a good story nonetheless, right? Whether or not you expected it.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, your point about like what are the expectations coming in and what do they turn into? But yeah, I liked Fudge for everything, outside of specifically landing, like the fact that his teleports are very good, that he's very good at getting Blabber in the right place at the right time. Like, just, and this sounds so banal, but it's so true. And full on pro players will have these problems. Being like actionably communicative with your teammates for what you need. Like, there was the string of games where we had Camille versus Jax, and Fudge just kept getting kills and kills and kills. It's like, yes, Blabber had good gank timing, but he didn't just like tell Fudge how to manipulate the wave and said, I'm coming on wave 2. Like,
Fudge is like, 3 waves from now, Blabber's going to be ready to gank me, so I need these waves to work out this way and end up in this spot.
Right. Almost always. And this is something that I'll give Darshan a lot of credit for as well. Back when Darshan played for CLG, the man would actually always get first blood top lane. Like, the guy would be up basically a turret and a bunch of kills in top side and then have no idea how to play mid game, and CLG would lose. Every single game, if you go back and watch Darshan from like 2017 or 18 or whatever, this would happen. Because Darshan is really good at telling his jungler what he needs and how to crush his top lane. And it kept happening against LCS top laners, right? Very, very, very good players out there, right? He's against Someday and Impact and Licorice doing this kind of stuff. When your top laner keeps finding first blood in a 2-kill lead top lane, it's because they are very good at telling the jungler what they need, when they need to be there, how to cover waves, when to push, like when to be there. It's not hand-holding, but it's being the right amount of communicative. And this is a skill top laners have, that top laners need, and that they should get credit for, where it's like, yeah, it might not be hard, but they're doing it, and these other players aren't. This player's 3-0, this player's not, because they're smart in communicating. This is a skill. This is relevant. It's not that hard to learn, I don't think, but it's a big one, and it's a lot of why Fudge has the good stats that he does.
Yeah, and some of the other things that we mentioned here, I think Dignitas is such an interesting story, because I think even with the drop-off that they've had, where they were up, having conversations, but are they one of the top 3 teams in the LCS, and do you believe in them or not? I mean, even the fact that you could have that conversation about them and have people on either side of that was already a really positive thing if you came in thinking they were the 8th or 9th team like I did. But, the fact that they dropped off down to like a 6th is still an overperformance of expectations on that. What do you think have been the big kind of standouts on what allowed them to overperform?
For Dignitas, Honestly, it was kind of all 5 players. So, although there's an asterisk at the very end because it's an I called it moment maybe. So, okay, Fake God, but he was outstanding rookie when he did play the first time around. And I would put him as, in the regular season, not playoffs, the 5th best performing top laner. Like, I actually think his regular season overall performances were like one peg above Someday. I thought he was actually a good top laner for the LCS. Now, there's a very, very low bottom side here as well, sure, but I thought he played well. Soligo, like, talking about performing above expectations, like, looked like absolute garbage. He looked so very bad. It's, back when he was on 100 Thieves, a while ago, it's like, yep, they brought in Ryu, which meant they had to bench Someday because the mid gap was so bad. They benched Someday to bring Fake God back in, because they needed Ryu to come out of retirement practically to like carry mid lane because holy crap, the Soligo mid gap was just too massive. It was tragic, and it's why everyone had Dignitas like 8th, because Soligo was like completely not fit for LCS when he played last time. And he was fine. Like, I probably wouldn't put him top half, but like it was you're a bit losing, but that's okay. The rest of your team is good, and that's fine. Like, someone has to be the 10th best or the 8th best mid laner. That's okay. I'm not giving him flack for that. It's just like you were the 11th best mid laner in a 10 mid laner league. That was the case before. I thought Neo played very well. I think his team fights are very efficient. Aframu was playing back to some of his better form. So it's like, look, Afro's playing to a top 4 level. Fake God's in a top 5 level. Dardoch, when he's not tilted and raging his team, is actually a top 4 jungler as well, right? Neo is doing pretty well. So it's like, yeah, that becomes a playoff team. Especially so when you've got, CLG can't put a roster together, and Golden Guardians roster is 3/5 of a bad academy team. Like, okay, well, getting to 6th from a free 8th isn't very hard anymore, but they still play better than Mortals, and they still played better than FlyQuest. So it's like, okay, well, you play better than 2 real teams, and you should deserve credit for that. Like, they were in fact better than those teams, and this is Fake God doing well, this is Neo doing well, this is Aframa doing well, and Dardoch playing to his level, not being tilted yet.
Yeah, and I think Dardoch, especially, like, when he does certain things that are, to I don't like the term, but coin flippy, right? Like, he'll make certain plays that if they work, they're going to work really well, and if they don't, basically high risk.
He's
plays.
risk loving,
and I think that's part of I think that's part of the issue why playoffs is harder for them, because opponents get to study him, right, and go, oh, he's going to do this, and we're going to just defend against that, and it's suboptimal to start with, so we can handle that. But I think Soligo is one where I personally would give him even more credit than you have. I think he was actually really good and kind of flew under the radar throughout the regular season. He won most of his lanes. He made some really good kind of subtle team fight plays that stand out. Like, there's one play that always stands out to me talking about him where it was in a dragon setup, and who is it? I think it might have been against EG. I don't remember exactly. I think it was EG, and Jizuke was pushing the mid wave, or maybe it was somebody else. And he was Victor, and he drops a W over the wall into the little choke between mid lane, coming around into Dragon Pit, and completely zones them out of the fight, and they win the entire fight because of it. And just recognizing, I'm the one who has to go and zone this fight, win the whole thing. Like, things like that showed his awareness. I was actually really impressed with him, especially because I think he's a great example of the kind of the storyline of players who have had a chance but had to drop back down to academy for a while are not write-offs, right? Like, they can come back in and be serviceable players or even hit really high ceilings. Maybe it was just not the right timing for them, or maybe they needed a different matchup with coaching staff or a different team environment. Don't write these players off because they had one chance and they didn't make it work on their first chance, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is totally true. I remember one of my, I don't know if it's really a story, about Core JJ was doing Worlds prep for Samsung Galaxy when they made it to finals and lost to SKT in 5. We're like, and I forget who the other support was, but Core JJ only split time on Samsung Galaxy that split. And it was weird because statistically, Core was like about the same as the other support, and like clearly the team couldn't decide who they wanted to play. So like they're like, hey, you're about as good as the other guy, but we're not sure. But all the casters, like me included, were like, but they just look better with Core. Like, they just seem to win like higher quality games. The KDAs look the same, and like the CSDs, and like all that stuff. But it's like, but just but it just looks better with Core. And then by the end of the World Championship, it's like, yeah, they went 0-3 in their group stage, and then Core came in and they went to World Finals, and then the next year they then won Worlds, and Core's never said that again. It's like, yeah, okay, we were right about that. Core really was that good. But it took a while for even the team playing with the player to like figure that out. That like there's just something here that's just like it's the rest of the way over. And for a player to get subbed out of his role constantly to then go to back-to-back World Finals and win a title, it's like, yeah, that was all in the same run, right? On the same team in the same org. Like this kind of stuff can happen as well, right? Where it's like, okay, well, slowly go, we're not really sure about you, and then improve LCS final, right? So it's always there for any player.
Yeah, and if you want to go even further back in the core, JJ, I mean, you could have written him off pretty quickly before he became a support.
Yeah,
yeah, Dignitas bot laner, not the greatest start to his career there, but it worked out in the end. He made the swap. Other players, especially Korean players, seem to be able to sometimes make these position swaps and become like Score or
and Score.
Yeah. But yeah, fun stuff. And I think I'm hoping that we're going to get a lot more positive storylines of players and teams developing. I think there are some candidates for it. I think even the Golden Guardians players, there's a chance. Like I think Blaze Olive has shown he has some potential to him there, and hopefully we can find more things to celebrate about that. If you really want to look
for Golden Guardians, I think Stixay, like towards the back end of the split, I think he built the self-confidence up, and I think Golden Guardians realized like he's actually our best player, and depending on how we're trying to be our only good player, he was very, very good. Stixay was like solo carrying some of some of the only Golden Guardians games they won. So he's another player where it's like, look, I was very happy with him off of CLG onto a very green roster, and he was quite good.
Yeah, I think if you really want to look for positive storylines and high potential things to celebrate, you can drop down and watch Proving Grounds, and there are a lot of great players and exciting things to watch. The next Fudge is there already, and so you should definitely check that out. But we've covered Proving Grounds on the show before. We're not going to dive into it too far. Switching gears a little bit, and this is less about a performance thing, but and more about like personability and so on. But who would you say are some of the current like faces of the LCS? There's a question that matters to me because I think marketing the players as a way to maintain or gain new fan interest is so important. And it's also really important for the players' kind of value in their careers because this influences what teams will pay to get them, and whether the teams pay attention to them, because you'd like to think that teams do their due diligence on scouting all the players and having a really good understanding of what they're good at and bad at. But the reality is whether you can fault them for it to a certain extent, but they're going to go off of public reputation or perception to a certain level, right? So who would you say, like, it was Bjergsen and Double Lift, right? Those were the two. Who are the candidates? Sure, Sneaker, yeah. Who are the candidates right now that you would say are becoming those faces?
Right. I mean, I think Spica is great. I think Huni is great. Like, we're going to start with TSM, but I mean, those two are quite public. They have great personalities. They're good on camera. TSM, I think, does a decent job of like getting them out there as well and be like, hey, look, like, they really do a great job, and that's outstanding. I like, I don't want to keep bringing it up, but he's always in front of my mind for whatever reason. Like Fudge, I actually like that. Fudge came out and being like, hey, by the way, I'm gonna clap every top laner. Look at me. Like I'm a fan of that one. I'm okay with the Double Lift-esque. Like, I will trash talk before the games. Trash talk after the game is pathetic. You have to trash talk before the game. As a fellow, I will trash talk to my friends and then beat them. Like, that is me if I'm confident, and I'll earn that. And if I lose, I'll earn that too. So I'm happy if Fudge did that. Perk's the same boat. Like, I think he did a good job bouncing off it. I'm gonna win the LCS I'm gonna win Lockout without dying, and then had the most deaths per game in his first game of Lockout. I'm like,
joke, guys.
He owns that. Yeah, but he owns that. That's good. So I'm a huge fan of Perks. I mean, Perks is maybe actually probably I will say, and then for anyone else you can say probably the greatest Western League of Legends player of all time. Like, of any North American or European born
player. It's him or
player.
Caps, and he has more tenure.
Exactly, right? He won titles in 2 roles. Caps got carried over the finish line kicking stream when he played AD carry. Perks was all pro mid laner after not playing mid lane for a year, and Caps was like, well, you could kind of play. Anyway, moving on. I think it's Perks, right? And Cloud9 has Perks. The LCS is Perks. We're gonna go win MSI with Perks. He's gonna defend his title. He's gonna beat Teal in another best of 5. This will be 3 in a row for him. and we'll keep going. So he's outstanding. I love Core JJ. That man is great. I don't know if it's his Photoshop game or he's getting help from someone on the org, but like his Photoshop game's on point, his Twitter game's on point. I love Core JJ. He is outstanding. I'm sad he's not playing to the level that I thought he was at the beginning of Lock-In. Because I liked quoting Alorum and calling them perfect human, and then he stopped being very good. Then I was like, never mind, I can't say this in good faith. But I remember like in Lock-In, like game 1, I was like, TL's gonna win MSI, and I'm like, they're not gonna win the LCS anymore, so never mind. So it's like, okay, but he's obviously really good. Unfortunately, like Aphromoo is not actually that really public of a personality, it feels like. Every time I kind of interact with him, he actually feels very shy, even though like there's a bunch of good stream highlight clips of him. He seems actually very shy, so he's like not quite the guy to carry the Dignitas brand. And unfortunately, there's probably not anyone else who's got like the cachet yet to do that. Like you can't go 0-3 in playoffs, then have someone talk a big game. So I'm not sure how they get there. But I mean, that's my I've got like 4 front runners right now.
Yeah. Well, you need it's such an interesting thing because you need this combination of performance and personality, right? Where you can have the performance from Aphromoo, maybe you don't have the personality. I think you've got the personality from Spica, and his performance is mostly there, but it has wobbles to it.
Right.
But he's a good candidate for that. I think Vulcan is one where the performance is absolutely there, but he seems much more quiet and reserved, right? He's another candidate, kind of like the Aphromoo, but as especially because I'd like to personally push the narrative of having as many Canadian faces of the LCS as possible. So let's put Vulcan up there.
Great.
But yeah, I think there are some out there that I'd especially love to see a couple more candidates pop up who are North American players, because I think that's so important for the fan engagement side of it. Not because I want to be biased against imports or something like that, because I think we have Perks and Core JJ and these kinds of guys who are really important to market with. And having superstars, imported superstars, is also a really great storyline for the fans. But I think, especially with Doublelift retiring, and then Bjergsen felt like an NA player his whole career, right? Because he was pretty much almost the entirety of it. He was in LCS, right? So getting to feel like this is ours, this is our player, waiting for that one person to come in and kind of pick up the Doublelift mantle, which is a pretty hard thing to do. But
it is, and we might see a few years of FBI domination, right? And he can try to pick that up. And obviously, like Australians and Kiwis, they're residents. I know, like finding the right terminology can be kind of strange. Like, they're residents. Because they're not North American players. Like they're Australian or from New Zealand. Like they're Oceanic players. But they're LCS residents. But also in the way that like he's a French Korean LCS resident. So, and then this is a topic I don't feel comfortable getting into because I don't have my thoughts on board. Like, when does someone like become American? I don't have good thoughts there. So we'll push past that one. But like, to your point though, Bjergsen kind of felt American. Like, clearly he's born in Denmark, but he lives in the US. He lives in Los Angeles. He's made his entire career here. It's been 7 years. Like, maybe that counts already, right? And clearly he felt local, right? He felt native because his entire career was local and native at this point. So, but we don't have a big personality AD carry, right? And it was like, I'm a cutie pie and Sneaky and Doublelift, right? And all 3 went off to have great streaming careers after their pro playing careers were done because they had great personalities and they were very good. And Cutie Pie was never really the best, but like, that's okay. Like, he was, an outstanding personality and people loved him because like he was good and an outstanding personality. And that's fine too. And so, but it does take some time, right? You have to build the individual brand. The teams are supposed to help you there as well. And I think we will get there. Like, there are some great stars in the making here.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge as well that this entire conversation can be very challenging to have in an appropriate way because there can be hints of kind of racism that come in around the import conversation that you'd always have to be a little careful about.
I know.
But, there's absolutely no intention of any of that when you talk about like wanting to hype up North American players. It's not at the expense of imported players or anything like that. No. But, it can go there. I think you have to avoid putting anything out there that might be interpreted in the wrong way. And you also have to avoid the other way, making accusations of bias when they're not intended or when they don't exist. I think there are gentle ways to do that and call things out, but it gets pretty challenging sometimes. But it's an important topic for the LCS, I think, in general, finding the right players to market with and market around and the right team brands and all that kind of stuff. And I think everybody's in it together. hyping the right players, hopefully good for everybody. So, yeah, I think this is, covering LCS has been there's so much to talk about, and we're getting into the most exciting part of the year. We have been in the most exciting part of the year in terms of a domestic league. We'll have time to talk about MSI in the future. But taking another bit of a direction shift here, I know that a lot of the LCS casters have been starting to dabble in, or in other games, covering other things, as Riot has released all of these other games over the past year.
Yeah.
And you've been getting into Legends of RuneTerra. So I'd love to just give you a little opportunity to talk about that, because I don't have really much of a card gaming background. I played a little bit of MTG when my cousin introduced it to me like 20 years ago, but never really stuck. Played a little bit of Hearthstone. I haven't actually picked up Legends of RuneTerra at all, but it's developing, right? Like, it's starting to grow. It's getting some grassroots movement. What has that been like, kind of getting involved in that game? What drew you to it in the first place?
Right. What drew me to it in the first place is just that I love the game. Like you, I played Magic the Gathering for a few years. I played Hearthstone for a few years. I played like some very old versions of LoR that look nothing like the version we have now. But I had done my share of like play in the office till 4 a.m. and then get 4 hours sleep and come back to work the next day or same day, even with the old version. So just for whatever reason, I was always really, really, really drawn to, what became known as Legends of RuneTerra. I just have really, really liked the game. I had thousands of games played before the game ever launched. Just like, it was fun, like is the TLDR, right? Like the game was fun, so I played it a lot. I hit Masters in the first 2 seasons, which is the highest rank. There's no challenger. And so just, I played the game a lot. I really enjoyed the game. Still really enjoy and play the game a lot. And I had conversations with my manager for a while about like, hey, I want to get involved in both LoR casting and Valorant casting, because those are 2 games that I knew existed, that I both enjoyed playing a lot of, and wanted to make sure like I was ready to go, like if esports portfolio blows up. And over the course of time, basically what it came down to is realizing that like, okay, like Valorant is like a full-time sort of esport, right? Like there's the whole championship tour going on and Masters and everything else. And it's like, okay, I don't actually have the time to dedicate to like cast Valorant, at that degree and do those kind of events. Like my job is casting the LCS, and that is my weekly gig, right? That's important. Legends of RuneTerra just is a more sort of sporadic esport. Like, you can look at, Twitch viewership for the regular game, which is not actually really that indicative, but even for esports broadcasts, like it is clearly a smaller esport than Valorant, right? So, it makes sense for Riot to not push as hard, right? Like it's a logical choice. So it's like, so there's no full-time LoR casting because there's no full-time LoR esports. It's like, yep, this is all logical. This all makes sense. I totally get it. But I want to be involved in the game as much as possible. And so whenever there are like the big Riot LoR stuff, which is basically the big seasonal tournaments, like I'm always like, I want to be involved. I want to be there, right? I want to be up in the meta. I want to cast. And so I've cast the last 2 LoR seasonals alongside Swim. He's a great streamer, by the way. He's probably live literally right now. If you're watching live, if not, you can still check him out. He's great. But I like the game a lot. It's fun covering other things. Like it's good to know that I can cover not just League of Legends as a professional caster, since I want to do this job in general for a long time. It's good to like know that I can do other things in case that needs to happen. It's a game I really enjoy. I'm glad I get to be involved in it. And so I try to be as much as possible.
How big of an influence do you think a kind of a budding game like this, the esports side of it, how much of an influence do you think that has on attracting new players in? Or is it more of a, the more the game gets popular, the more the esport will follow behind? What's been your experience in a new game like this one?
So in my experience sort of following esports and following gaming for the couple of decades I've been doing so, I don't know how much esports is good at player acquisition. I'm sure there's probably some degree of it. And certainly you want to do right by your current players, but having been a former sort of semi-pro gamer before and being like, okay, so they're putting this new game out and they're going to be like, it's going to be in WCG and they're going to do it. Okay, well, I'll buy the game and compete in World Cyber Games and I will qualify for nationals. Then my parents will let me go because I'm not doing well in school. It's like my story of playing Command & Conquer 3, for example.
You could name a few games that were marketed as the next big esport before they were released, but there's no point because the audience wouldn't know who would any of them were.
Right. and in all of those cases, it's like I competed at those games to the level where I could play for $50,000 prizes. I did it in Command & Conquer, and I did it in a game called World in Conflict, which none of you have heard of. And that's fine. And it was, I mean, actually an okay game. But it's like I could pick up those games because there was a guaranteed paycheck sometime down the line, and it was way more than I was making playing Warcraft 3. And like, so I would buy those titles and play them because like this will be EV positive for my time, and like objectively that was going to be true. But no one else cares. Like realistically, like, I don't feel like you sell a lot of boxes that way or anything. So whatever. It was like the attempted marketing push for some titles, but like I don't think that really builds longevity like from the outside in.
Yeah.
Now that said, if your most enthusiastic players are staying in the game because there's more to do, because there's streamer support or creator support in general or tournaments to play in, and like those bring viewership and help grow the stream and whatnot, like cool. Like those are really like cool people to have around that like you do want to support like as a publisher, because that is going to help, when all the card game streamers go, actually, we all love LOR. And it's like, oh, well, my favorite card game streamer is only streaming LOR now. I guess I should play too. Like that to me is more important. And so that to me, like if I'm the person making the marketing decisions or whatever, it's like, yeah, esports are for the active players, right? Esports are to make sure your active players are happy, because like you're making a live service game, you should be making your live players happy. Like that's literally the point of what you're doing. That's why you should have a live service game, is to service your live players, right? Like, I know I'm getting a little bit off on a tangent, but I think this is something that I care a lot about.
It's relevant.
I've seen a lot of people who complain about games as a service, and I think some of that is justified on certain products. But if your game is meant to be a service and you mean to have players play for 5 years, I think it's very important that like your company's business model lines up with the players' like play model, right?
Yeah.
And so a game like World of Warcraft or League of Legends or Legends of RuneTerra, like if you want someone to play for 8 years, you need to develop the game for 8 years, which means you need to have a reason to develop the game for 8 years, which means there needs to be more than just, I bought the box in 2003, please keep patching the game. And it's like, but you bought the game in 2003, our interests don't align. And it's like, out of the goodness of your heart or for like brand building, you could keep patching the game. But, if I want to play a game for 10 years, you bet I want people to buy things year 9, because then the developer is going to keep patching the game, at year 9. So that's, that's important, right? I want that to line up. And so for any game that I want to play for that long, I actually want that service model. And I think esports can be a part of that.
Yeah, I think people still often will have, and I think to some extent myself as well, the idea that esports is a marketing tool for player acquisition, when I think, especially, to a lot of the points you made and a lot of the ways that you should be looking at it, it does make a lot more sense as a player retention, customer satisfaction kind of a play, that somebody who plays a lot and then they watch the esports, broadcasts, and they go, I want to go back and play some more games, and they just continue to reinvest themselves. And these are the games that make the biggest impressions in our lives, is the ones that you do reinvest yourselves into and have kind of recurring content and all that kind of stuff. So I think it just makes a lot of sense.
And one other piece there as well is, and this is true for like the really big, like the tier 1 esports, like League of Legends and Valorant, and of course other ones as well that, that Riot don't make. But like also in those things that are big enough, like esports themselves can also be a viable business opportunity, right? Like it is possible to sell enough sponsorships that like you are the NBA or the NFL, where it's like, you're not making the NBA to sell basketballs. You're making the NBA to sell ads and make money and get the players and the owners and everyone rich, right? So it's like, in some cases, you can have your cake and eat it too when you're sufficiently big enough that you can, because like a broadcast costs money regardless of how many people watch it, right? So like the bigger it is, the more you can actually make that, continue off into the right.
Yeah, and the fact that you have third-party tournament organizers who run leagues or run tournaments and so on and are actually able to stay in business shows that it is possible to have that. I think it depends on the overall structure of your esport and all that kind of stuff, and the goal of it and all that, but it definitely can happen. Well, yeah, I think it's cool to see, especially as Riot has released all these other games, and they do have varying levels of grassroots player growth and esports visibility. I know that the latest TFT kind of seasonal tournament is running right now with a big international event. Was watching a little bit of a cast of that this morning, so that's fun to see. It actually got me playing a couple games because I hadn't in a while. Nice. Also, my kids always pester me to play TFT because they think it's fun.
Oh,
but
that's cool.
But I haven't been playing it as much. But yeah, it's cool to see that. So why don't we cap things off a little bit with some listener questions? we have one that was submitted on the Patreon, and for anyone who's not aware, you can I post the guest a couple days in advance, and you can go on patreon.com/oracleselixir and submit questions to be asked for the guest there. So this one came from Edward Greene, who wanted to know, Phreak, how has your casting style changed, adapted, or improved over the years?
It's changed and improved by me, I guess, kind of figuring out what I want to do. So, it'll sound kind of silly, but like there's it's not rules of thumb, it's not really platitudes, but it's figuring out a sort of view that makes sense for casting, because like I can speak English reasonably well. I know the game quite well. Like I can talk quick. But it's like, okay, but what do we actually need out of the broadcast? What do we need out of me, right? So I remember, in sort of earlier days of LCS and seeing fan sentiment, and it's like, wow, look at Monte Cristo. He's willing to call bad plays bad, and look at all these LCS casters sugarcoating their bad players. And it's like, ooh, if I'm too reactionary to this feedback, I'm just going to flame everyone all the time. Yeah. Look at me. I'm doing what you want, right, internet? And it's like, that's just what like some person said on Reddit or Twitter or whatever. Like, why is that important to you? But it's still honing in direction. It's like, okay, how positive do we have to be? How negative do we have to be? When we talk about stakes, whatnot, and it's just like there's a lot of just like figuring out ultimately like what is the right thing to say, and if we're gonna like do a super big zoom out and take a really general rule of thumb, it's like you want to say the right thing at the right time, and that's not actionable, that's not useful, but that's the umbrella, and that means that when
you don't have a standard cast.
Yeah,
have not a conservative one, not a risk averse.
Right, but that's the thing. It's like you don't want a risk averse cast or really necessarily a risk loving cast. Like obviously you want to be, charismatic and fun to listen to. But like, some of it was like I wasn't very funny early on. And not that my jokes were necessarily bad, although, whatever, it's its own debate, but like the comedic timing was horrible. Like there's still a moment that is lodged in my memory that I'm just cringing about. Which was, I think, like the season 2 NA Worlds qualifier, which is obviously a lot earlier in my career, where, it's like Jad or Kobe or whoever's like, yeah, they're going to go for a lot of picks in this comp. And I stop him mid-sentence and go, they haven't picked Lulu. There's no picks in this comp. And it's just like, Phreak, you're such an idiot. Please don't disrupt the broadcast for this not funny joke. Like, and at the time, I thought that was the right idea. But I'm adding humor. Don't you get it? So, that got better over time. And now I can say things that are actually funny occasionally. And look, and I want to be clear, like, it's okay to like have a certain style and that not everyone likes what you do. It's just important to like not be a complete idiot when doing so. And so that means things like, look, not everyone likes puns or my sense of humor or my references or whatever. And that's okay. That's fine. But, don't detract from the broadcast if you can help it. It's okay to be critical when it's appropriate, but you don't want to spend the entire game calling both teams bad. Sometimes you accept like this is a 10th place team versus a 9th place team. Well, let's try to not be ultra negative because we already know these teams aren't very good, relative to the level of play we've normally been seeing. So let's talk about the parts that do stand out. Let's cherish the players that do make good plays and give credit where that's due and, tell the story that like, yep, these are a bunch of rookies and yep, it's, their first time on the stage here and that's okay. And like these things will always sound obvious in retrospect. Like one thing I've seen anytime someone like retros, their game design or whatever their part of their career is like, well, of course you should do that. It's like, yeah, but they still have to learn it at some point. And so figuring those things out makes sense.
How do you find the balance between, getting your own personality out there and making sure that you have a really clear kind of brand and personality versus not making the show about you? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, of course. And that's important. And I think like I spent a lot of conscious effort while casting actually about that specific line of reasoning. Because it is about the games, but unapologetically, those games are through my eyes, when casting. And they're also through Azale's or Kobe's eyes or whomever else, right? So we can't step each other's toes too much because we will, I think, pretty frequently actually have disagreements on how the game should be played out. I remember there was an example of Azael being like, "Ooh, why'd this guy go Zeal and not finish Rageblade?" And at the time, I was like, "Well, I don't know. There's a case to be made that Zeal is better." And then I went and did a video about it. There were some mistakes, but it's still reasonably accurate. But well, okay, going to Zeal is appropriate. I remember actually the next weekend when Azael and I cast together, we were like, "Hey, I thought we actually handled that moment pretty well." Where it's like, look, we are not costing the game. We're having a personal disagreement about item builds, and we can spend a little bit of time on that one. Then we got to move on. But we spent the right amount of time about it.
Yeah.
We want to be respectful to each other, obviously. Respectful to the audience, though, as well. If a play is correct or wrong, that needs to be called out. And then if it's a judgment call, we have to make sure we're saying it's a judgment call. And that is one thing where it can be easy to get wordy, where I'll be like, "Ooh, this guy made an item choice for item 2. Here's the pros, here's the cons. I'm not sure I agree, but we should move on." And finding the right amount of words for "Hey, he made this choice that I think is very strange, but here's the pros and cons. We'll see how it plays out for him." Is an okay way of doing that. But yeah, it's by nature, we're humans interpreting the game we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that's, especially as a caster, but also just as an analyst in general, I think it is pretty important to make it clear when I don't, in some cases also, I don't know the complete clear answer to this, but here's, trying to explain both sides of it, or what I think the reasoning might be, or the fact that it is a judgment call. I think being able to put that out there, not trying to always be, I have to be an authority on everything I say, otherwise it's not worth saying. I think that can be a pretty good line to walk as well, and a tricky one.
Yeah, for sure.
Bebop 1988, wants to know what you think about NA being a patch behind other regions for the playoffs, since we started a patch or started a week earlier than most other playoffs.
Sure. I think for most people who are raising a big stink, it is overblown. That said, I don't think it's ideal. So I don't know if the LCS could have played their games a week later and still had a venue for finals. I don't know, to be clear. This is, me guessing. This could have just been well, it's all we've got. There's an argument to be made that the rule set should be amended and allow playoffs to move a patch forward. In the case where other leagues are already on the second patch, it gives Dignitas and EG a prep advantage, which is unfair to TSM and 100 Thieves.
Yeah.
Because they would have never had to play an 11-5, and TSM and 100 Thieves would have had to prep a best of 5 on it. So that's its own issue. I think it's also unfair to say that the first best of 5s have to play on 2 days' notice on 11-6. So that's also awkward. And then you have and then of course we know MSI is happening, right? And that calendar is locked in well in advance. So you have to be done in time, and then be able to get teams to ship out to Iceland, and maybe quarantine has to happen. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. But then you also have other leagues where it's oh, hey, did you know the LCK playoff format has a 2-day break? And so if you're going to make the gauntlet run, you have 1 day off between best of 5s. Ooh, good luck playing on form with that, right? And it's this is not to flame LCK, but for example, the LCS has, you can call it a negative of, their games aren't on as recent a patch as another league. In the LCK, you have a team who maybe deserves to go, who's suffering from maybe burnout or fatigue because their playoff format is really tight. Maybe the LEC format and the LPL formats are perfect. I'm not sure. I don't know, where that line is drawn and what's going on there. The long tail single elimination is maybe fine. Double elim is maybe not needed when you're only trying to qualify a single best team. And in fact, the LCS really could have gone for a 6-team, week bracket. But the weeks of that means you're not playing your best teams in the opening week of playoffs, which means, we're just waiting a week or 2 weeks for Cloud9 to play. And, that is also a scheduling negative. And I forget if LEC had G2 play in the week 1 of their playoffs. I don't know if they've really been playing any games yet. Maybe they'll show up next weekend. So all these formats have their own issues, to be clear. I'm not saying the LCS is perfect, right? And at the end of the day, my thoughts are it is unfortunate that they are not playing on 11.6. But MSI is going to be on 11.8, 9. Yeah. The meta is going to be different from the 11.6 meta anyway, right? No one's playing on Kemp Tank nerfs. No one's playing on the second round of Udyr nerfs and Hecarim nerfs. So, the jungle meta is going to be different, regardless. are the LCS qualifiers any less valid, or are those teams any less prepped? I would argue no, that like there is technically a difference, but I don't think it's ever as big as people think.
Yeah, you get a little bit of a desync in like your practice on the tournament realm scrims versus your practice in solo queue live servers, and like that it's maybe a slightly longer of a struggle, but it gets out of sync anyways, right? Yeah. Regardless, it's going to get out of sync. So hopefully it won't. And I don't think it will set the LCS teams back relative to if they had been doing it on 11.6. So, but it's an interesting question, and those formats are tough to perfect, and I don't think you can ever fully perfect them. And we'll do one more here.
Cool.
So DV9er is wondering, and says, in League of Legends, people tend to identify with a certain region rather than a certain team, like you would typically get in conventional sports. Why do you think that is, and do you tend to kind of back certain regions against other ones other than NA?
Sure. So, I mean, I think... So it's funny because I've seen this question phrased almost the opposite way as well, which is like in traditional sports, right? You're a fan of a team, but really you're a fan of a region. Certainly there's like the 2 LA teams and 2 New York teams in some sports as well, so that's not always perfect, but like...
A city region as opposed to a continent.
Yeah. I'll bet you people from Cleveland support the Cleveland local teams, like people in Washington are going to support Washington baseball team, are they not? Right? Like, are they a fan of Washington baseball team, or are they a fan of the state of Washington because they live in Washington, right? Like, it's like, well, turns out people are a fan of regional identity. And then the World Cup happens, and guess who the Germans are supporting? I'll bet you the support Team Germany, right? I root for the U.S. athletes at the Olympics, and I root for NA, and I root for the LCS and things like Worlds. So there seems to always be that level of regional identity. Ultimately, because it's esports and not traditional sports, we don't have a lot of geolocated teams. I know the LPL right now is doing more and more geolocating of their teams, to the point where they just put the word Beijing in front of the team name, and it's like, yes, this is the Beijing team. I don't know how successful it's going to be, or has been so far. I just really don't know. I've seen other esports ventures try that as well. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers the Championship Gaming Series, but I had friends on the LA Optics. I didn't like them because they were based in LA. To be fair, I was in San Diego at the time anyway, but I like them because they were teammates of mine before. I don't know if that's doable. Now, that said, like, I think ultimately it's the kind of thing where esports and traditional sports are going to be different. So traditional sports have the easy benefit of geolocation. It's like, well, we're in Florida, so we like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, or maybe the Dolphins, right? But, based on where you are, off you go. Here, it's like, oh, I watched Sneaky stream for 3 years, and now he's in the LCS. Cool, I'm now a Cloud9 fan. And it's like, you have some of that with like college sports, sure, right? You're like, ooh, yeah, I'm a big fan of LSU, and the Heisman winning quarterback went off to go play for this team, so I'm going to follow this team a little bit. And normally I'd be all about the Saints, but I'm also going to follow the Broncos because of this quarterback. And now I get some extra benefit here, so I got to like advance my geolocation like affinity a bit further. That's reasonable, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm a fan of Doublelift, which means I'm a fan of TSM, and I'm a fan of TL, and I was a fan of CLG, and it's like, maybe you kept your CLG affinity. So there's almost bigger player brands or more player brands, like obviously like Steph Curry and LeBron, like those guys are obviously a really big deal. But like, very rarely do they become famous before their pro careers and then it follows, right? You don't have that nearly as often. Whereas again, compared to players like Sneaky and Dyrus and whatnot, where like they had their own fame and carried that to their team. And that's like part of how TSM got so big. So that is an avenue that esports has uniquely, is that you can build your fan of a player, and because of how accessible streaming is and how similar it is to like watch someone stream League of Legends to watch like, is Steph Curry going to stream him shooting the free throws? Not really. Like you consume the content maybe, from Sports Nation or whatever, but like not really.
Yeah, I think you get these differences, and they're kind of strengths and weaknesses to the traditional kind of approach versus kind of the esports online approach, where streaming gives you a certain level of access, so you're going to hook onto the players as opposed to being kind of city based geolocation, and that allows you to hook onto that. Like, there are different things that you hook onto, and I think sociologically it's a very interesting topic that I don't think has been explored all that much, and could be a lot more. I think there are some big nuances to it and what it means. And esports has been trying to figure this out for 20 plus years now to some extent.
Sure.
Team-based, not as much, and I think that's where it becomes a little more relevant. Like it started out with much more individual-based games, but it's as a sociologist by education and a little bit of working on it, that's the kind of question that I do kind of go, oh, that is new, that's different, that's unique. So
yeah,
fun to dig into for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's going to do it for the time we have together. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today, Phreak. I'll make sure your Twitter link is in the show notes so people can follow you if they aren't already there. Is there anything else you'd like to shout out that you've been working on, or places for people to follow you?
Yeah.
Some people can't see with their ears in the audio version.
Oh, that's true. You're right. Yeah, for all the audio listeners. So Twitter at RiotPhreak, PH, if you didn't know. I have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Phreak. Which I put stuff on occasionally, usually like random deep dives into topics of things that interest me and are usually pretty interesting to other people as well. So I have like a deep analysis on like mana pools in League of Legends. Oftentimes it's like me half whining about things that I like pretend are relevant. It's better than it sounds. Ultimately, yeah, check me out on Twitter and YouTube. That's basically where all my stuff is. I stream like once a month on Twitch TV/Phreak stream. That one's less important. I tweet about it when it goes up, though. And yeah, otherwise, keep supporting Tim. He's great.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks again for being on the show. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/oracleselixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, where you can talk about League of Legends esports and other games, data science, and a lot of other topics. And links for all of those will be in the show notes as well. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhuysen. Thanks for listening.